What could be better than an unforgettable summer vacation at a camp? I thought sarcastically, early in the morning, as I emerged from Block C, where the 2nd Scout Troop was still peacefully snoozing. The morning mist lazily lay on the ground, and the tall pines seemed to obscure the sun that hadn't yet had time to rise. Looking around, I lazily went to the meeting, trying to find a pack of cigarettes taken from one of the campers the day before in my pocket. By the way, I worked in the camp as a counselor of the 2nd Troop. Actually, I was sent for the internship by the Pedagogical College, where I graduated the 2nd year not so long ago. And in general, to be honest, I liked it there. I rested my soul and body, enjoyed nature, and the incredibly clean pine air. The only thing that bothered me a little was the early rise. For sure, I wasn't used to that. Even when I still studied at the college, I didn't always come to the first class. Probably that was the reason why I was sent here. As I've already said, it was some kind of internship. Moreover, it was even paid at the initiative of the director of the camp. She told me that every worker must be paid, even the most insignificant one. All the kids at camp were nice, and for the most part, even adequate. Especially in my troop, I had 15 of them, who were adults and understood everything I said. Of course, some of them tried to show off at first, but my threat to forbid going to the disco quickly made them obedient. It is obligatory to find an approach to children, and I found it. I became their friend and mate, who would definitely help them in their time of need. Need a cigarette? Take it. Just hide somewhere in the toilet. Need advice on how to pick up a girl? Let's go to the counselor's room. I'll tell you. And so on. I suppose everyone knows what a meeting in a camp is, but for those who don't, I'll explain in a few words. All counselors and instructors gather early in the morning in one place and make some kind of plan for the next day. It would seem nothing complicated, except for rising at 5:30 in the morning. The morning there was perfect silence in the camp. I walked along smoking a cigarette, not afraid to show a bad example to the children, as they were still asleep. Birdsong and light morning breeze created its own unique atmosphere, and it seemed that I just woke up and climbed out of the tent somewhere in the godforsaken forest. Still, there are some traces of civilization in the camp. So does a certain list of strict rules. They are adhered to by everyone, from the smallest scout to the director. As in the army, those who broke the rules weren't allowed to go to the disco or to watch movies. Perhaps that was the most valuable thing for the children. Today there was to be a sports competition and a soccer championship. That was discussed at the planning meeting. Yesterday, we had a cup brought to the camp, a stack of certificates and medals, as well as a whole box of sweets for the winning troops. The schedule is light for today, I thought, listening to the tedious and monotonous voice of the head counselor. I was so sleepy that even the cool morning air couldn't help me this time. The meeting ended at about 7 a.m., and after breakfast, all the counselors went to the blocks to wake up the children. Together with the instructor, we went into the building, then into the rooms, and began to wake the kids. Some of them had already woken up, and some slept like logs. I went to the last room, and at the end of the corridor, I heard talking behind the door.
He was running around without his head. That's what Johnny told me. And you believe that? How can a man run without his head? He's dead.
The second voice answered. That's not true. It's just scary stories for kids. A third voice answered. Who was running around without his head? I said, opening the door.
Mr. Roberts, eavesdropping is bad,
smiled Ricky.
I'll keep that in mind. Get up, brush your teeth, and go for breakfast in 10 minutes.
The guys, with dissatisfied faces, rose from their beds, took soap and water supplies, and went outside. Swimming in the river, sporting events, and the soccer championship were really fun. I even got a little hoarse when I was cheering for our bow-leg team, which managed to miss 5 goals from the 3rd troop. Obviously, the trophy and a box of sweets bypassed us, though we were given consolation certificates. I won't go into too much detail, but the only thing I heard throughout the day was the headless man. The camp must have heard another horror story, like about a black hand grabbing everyone's ass in the toilet, or a coffin on wheels. Children's imagination is limitless. They make up their own monsters, and then they're afraid to go to the bathroom at night. Everybody was talking about him, even the smallest kids, as well as the most intelligent ones. The reason for this was probably the evening of horror stories that took place just a couple of days ago. Everyone gathered around the campfire and began to tell what they know, but I've heard no stories about the headless man that night. Nevertheless, I don't mind them imagining. At least I'll have something to scare them with, I thought. Gathering everyone in our gazebo, I announced the evening event and the so-beloved disco after it. The kids rushed into the rooms to make some preparations. The girls begrudgingly tried to put on makeup, and the boys poured tons of Daddy's toilet water on themselves, turning the camp into a hazardous zone. Again, in the hallway, I heard the same conversations, children worriedly talking about the headless man. There was even someone who saw him behind the fence of the camp. Maybe they ate something wrong, that they see headless people behind the fence, I thought, smiling. I walked out of the counselor's room, gathered everyone in front of the block, and we went to the disco. Everything was according to the plan. We danced for a few hours, had a second dinner, and went to the bunks. Thanks to the early rise, my eyelids were getting heavier during the disco, even in spite of the loud music. With difficulty putting the kids to bed, I went to rest myself. Again, I heard the same conversations through the rather thin wall. The next morning was far from being good. As usual, I left the building at about 5 o'clock and went to clean myself up. The toilets, showers, and sinks were outside. I went into the toilet, thinking that no one was there yet, but I was wrong. I glanced in the far corner next to the stall and noticed a girl huddled in a corner and crying. Of course, I immediately ran up to her to calm her down. The girl wasn't from my troop. "Why are you crying? What happened? What troop are you from?" She didn't react to my words. She didn't even raise her head. I had to help her do it. This little girl was in the 5th troop, and she was one of the youngest campers. She was sitting, whimpering, covering her eyes with her hands, and not even trying to talk to me. She was definitely scared about something. "What's your name?"
Katie,
"Who hurt you, Katie?"
the headless.
"Really?"
Yes, really.
Suddenly, she shouted.
Don't you believe me? But he came.
"Where did he come?" I asked her confusedly.
To our big house. Everybody had seen him.
"All right, that's it. We'll drive him away. Come on, let me help you." I picked the girl up from the floor, gave her a little hug, and took her back to her troop, and having a serious talk with their counselor, who had lost the child. At the meeting, I didn't tell anyone about this incident, not wanting to expose a colleague. But later, inexplicable things started to happen. The kids were afraid to come out of the buildings. During the daytime, some of them had short walks, but when the sun hid behind the horizon, everyone's favorite disco became unnecessary, and nobody wanted to watch a movie either. The older guys from my troop, and from my first, didn't pay attention to the younger, but soon even they began to ask parents to get them out of here as soon as possible. But what adult would believe a fairy tale invented by their own children? Soon, the camp became a dull and depressing place, without loud children's laughter, games, or music. It was raining heavily for 2 days, so we had to stay inside all the time and keep somehow entertaining ourselves. One day, we all got together to watch a movie on my laptop, so we started talking. Nobody had told me anything before. Probably, they were afraid that I wouldn't believe. Guys, I understand everything, but what is the reason for your sudden unwillingness to rest? Ricky immediately responded.
Because there is a headless man wandering around the camp.
Are you already going crazy with your headless or what? And where is his head? I smiled.
But we really saw him. I swear.
Yes, we saw him. At first we thought that the kids were imagining things, but last night in the window, we saw him behind the fence, said Paul. Let's say my right-hand man in the troop. The kindest and most decent guy whose word I never dared to doubt, even though he's just a kid. Even you saw him? Yes, I saw it first, and then I called the others. So you're all running around the block, right? I smiled, trying to change the conversation, but it didn't work. I finally decided to play a movie, but even then a bad feeling crept up on me, a feeling of inexplicable anxiety, which I immediately tried to block out with other good thoughts. We watched movies until the night before the kids scattered to their rooms. Night fell on our heads, and the children closed their eyes. The next day began even worse than the previous one. The rain was pouring heavily, just like the day before, preventing me from going to the wash basin in the early morning. But still, I put on my hood and ran out of the building. Luckily, there was a big awning above the wash basins. A horrible surprise awaited me there. I found the body of a child. I was horrified, and didn't even try to approach her, since the blood had covered several wash basins, and the girl was lying in a huge puddle of scarlet liquid. The corpse was fresh, and blood still gushing from a huge, ugly cut on her neck. I had goosebumps all over my body, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I couldn't move, as if I were paralyzed. Staring at the little corpse, I remembered how a few days ago she had been running and having fun on the lawn and singing songs at competitions. I recognized her. She was the girl from the 4th Troop. Soon, I finally came to my senses. The cold stream of water running down the gutter directly on my head helped me. As quickly as possible, I ran across the camp to the director, just as everyone had quietly gathered for the staff meeting. Although it was no longer of any use, the children were possessed by an unknown fear, which was already creeping up on me. A child was killed, I wheezed, out of breath. Judging by my appearance, they couldn't doubt my words and immediately rushed after me. When we got to the corpse, several of the young girl counselors fainted, and the director covered it with her jacket. The woman's face immediately changed. Fear, that's what moved her at that moment. I could see it in her eyes. She was the director, so she was responsible for everything that happened there. I'll probably never forget that day. Several guards were fined and fired. The counselor of the 4th Troop went to the police station, along with the police and the director. I was also invited, but I had nothing more to say. There were police officers on the grounds for almost the whole day, and they left only in the evening. We, together with the remaining counselors and instructors, called parents, explaining that there was an accident and the children had to be taken home. But alas, not many responded. After all, why do parents send their child to a summer camp? Because they need some time to travel and relax. In most cases, so it happened. Half of the parents and guardians were abroad. A few people didn't pick up the phone, and the rest still agreed to come tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Still, there were those who picked up their child that night. Perhaps in this way, they rescued the lives of their children because the events that happened later were completely unforeseen. All the counselors prepared thoroughly for the night. All the doors even locked, so did the windows. I drank coffee like a lunatic, not sparing my heart at all. Every couple of minutes, I looked out the windows. The kids were also awake, but I refused to believe what they were talking about until the last minute. I could have disbelieved what the kids were saying. I could have disbelieved the other counselors, but I couldn't disbelieve my own eyes. I saw him that night. Just a glimpse, but I saw him. A kid from the next door to the counselor's room called me.
Mr. Roberts?
The boy whispered as he reached the door. I was already half asleep when I approached him. What happened?
The headless.
Are you serious?
Yes, he's there, behind the window.
Well, let's see. When I got out of the counselor's room, I went straight into the guy's room and stared out the dark window, drenched in rain. Well, where is he?
Over there.
The boy pointed a finger in the direction of the fence. I felt like I'd been scalded. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but when I looked closer, I realized that there really was somebody by the fence, and that somebody was missing his head. It was a human silhouette, 2 arms, 2 legs, everything as it should be, except for the head.
Close the curtains now. Don't look in there,
I said in a trembling voice. The children immediately obeyed and did as I said. I ran through the rest of the room and ordered them to do the same. Jesus, what the hell is that? I thought to myself. As I tried to dial the phone number, the light in the building was on, so the kids wouldn't be so scared. So I stood there, dialed the director's number, put the phone to my ear, looked out the window, and noticed that someone rushed and stopped, literally in front of me. I could hear everything, even in spite of the rain drumming on the roof.
Hello?
The voice sounded from the phone.
Hello?
But it was as if I didn't hear it. All my attention was fixed on something that stopped not far from the window. A man's body, in a t-shirt splattered with either dirt or something else. Usual shorts, and no head. He was standing about 20 meters away from me, but I could see him clearly. He didn't stay there for long, as he started flailing around after a few seconds. Fear once again shackled me with cold metal chains, and even the angry voice of the director couldn't bring me to my senses. I dropped the phone from my hand when whatever was running outside the building suddenly leaned against the window. Frankly speaking, I thought I was going to pass out in that corridor. It was so sudden and so scary that I did something that I'm still ashamed of. I ran like a child into the counselor's room and locked myself in. Could it be that everything I thought to be the children's fantasy turned out to be true? Who is he? After all, an ordinary man wouldn't be able to run without a head. After a few minutes, the pieces of the puzzle gradually began to fit together. That girl in the bathroom, then the corpse of another child, then the panic of the whole camp, and now finally, I saw him personally. While I was sitting in the counselor's room, I saw him again. He was already running from the other side of the building. And finally, after a few minutes, he was gone. I no longer saw him or heard his footsteps. The next morning, another body was found. The guy from the first troop was found hung on a tree outside the camp, right next to the fence. Then again, a whole day of police at the camp, crying parents, and kids scared half to death, especially his roommates, constantly repeating only one thing.
We saw him. He was headless.
The counselor was taken to the police station. The children also had to be driven home, since 2 dead bodies in 2 days is a huge disaster. The whole proceeding lasted into the night. As long as the police were in the camp, I felt protected or something. The children were taken away, and I had to leave the next day. So when the police left, I stayed alone in the block. A few counselors also remained in their blocks, so I thought to go to them, but a long and difficult day made my eyes close at around midnight. I was dreaming soundly when I heard loud and fast footsteps from the corridor. Being sleepy, I shouted without thinking.
Zoe, is that you?
Zoe is one of the counselors I've mentioned before. Suddenly, the footsteps froze next to my door, just as I was sitting on the chair and guessing who was running there. Suddenly, there was a banging on the door that made my heart pound rapidly. The knocking was repeated again and again until finally the door creaked open, breaking out part of the door frame. It was already standing a few feet away from me, bare, dirty feet, the same dirty white t-shirt, and the same twisted hands. But the most interesting thing was his fingers, which were sticking out unnaturally in different directions. Without thinking, I jumped onto the table, broke the window, and ran for cover. For a while, the headless man was still standing in the room, but soon rushed after me. When I ran to the playground and turned around, I didn't notice him. The most obvious decision was to run to the other counselors and tell them everything I had seen. So I did, but they heard nothing new. The girls had also faced him, but he didn't interact with adults until now. Moreover, one of the counselors told me a strange story about a kid who committed suicide while staying exactly in this camp.
Everybody was mocking him, and he was an orphan. Other children had cell phones or Walkman players, while he had nothing. Everybody was mocking him. Other boys dated girls and communicated with each other, but he was very humble. He didn't stand out, didn't talk to anybody, didn't make friends. Because of this, the youngsters didn't like him, so they began to make fun of the child in any way they could. And one day they found him, hung on a clothesline. I don't know whether it's true or not, but when I asked the director about this case, she flatly refused to even say a word. The restless soul of the boy might seek revenge on the kids at the camp.
And there's nothing we can do about it?
I have no ideas.
Maybe we could appease him somehow,
said Alexis, the other counselor.
Leave him some sweets or toys.
That night, the box of sweets for the winners of the soccer tournament and some toys left by the campers were taken outside the camp. We never saw him again that night, and he didn't bother us. The only thing I can say is that in the morning, we didn't find that box of candy and toys behind the fence.